Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello and welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby, and I am joined today by a special guest from across the pond. We're joined by Philip Courtenay, a financial behavior expert currently finishing his PhD. He's the founder of the great website Humans and Money, where he helps financial planning and invest in business reveal what's really driving people's financial decisions and shaping their behavior. He's here today to share some wisdom with us. Welcome to the show, Philip.
Hello, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
No, great. Where are you joining us from today?
I am in North Hertfordshire in the UK, a little town called Hitchin.
Wonderful. Okay, so we just had a guest from Essex, and now we're 2 for 2 today on the podcast with the UK. So beautiful to have you. Beautiful to have you join us. So I read a very stripped down bio just now. I'm not a big fan of the big formal bio. I feel like it's a little cumbersome. But a piece in your formal bio that I didn't touch on that I want to get to now is that you actually won an award for some research you did into the drivers of advice seeking. Now, insofar as most of my listeners or many of my listeners are financial advisors, I'm sure they're very eager to know what you found about what drives people to seek out financial advice. What can you share with us?
Yeah, thanks. Lots, hopefully. It's an interesting area. The way to look at this, or the way I tend to look at this, is not necessarily what drives people towards advice, but what stops them from taking advice. And the reason I would kind of think about it like that is people want the benefits of advice. Right? They want to feel secure. They want to feel in control. They want to know what their future looks like. They want to do whatever they can to make the most of their money. They want the benefits that advisors provide. So the question is really what stops people from taking advice? Because if you looked at that on paper, well, it's a pretty good proposition, right? I'm sure much of your audience would agree with me. And the answer is a bit of a complex one, but there are sort of 3 areas that tend to act as tethers for people taking action to engage with an advisor. And the way I think about this is like a hot air balloon. All right, if you imagine a hot air balloon, you pump it up with hot air, and it rises. But if that hot air balloon is tied to the ground with the tethers, these ropes, it won't go anywhere. And if we think about these tethers for people who are taking financial advice, they can be economic tethers. They can be the cost of advice, or at least the perceived cost. That's clearly an obvious one. But then we think about also the risk as an economic tether. What if actually they lost their money? What if the advisor just ran off with their money? What if there was an economic negative impact on that person? So you got the economic costs, the economic barriers. But the ones I think are really interesting are the other 2, the effort-related tethers and the emotional tethers. And neither of these, or very rarely at least, would someone sit in front of you, a prospective client, or in my own research and I'm interviewing people, and say, I don't take financial advice because I'm scared, because I feel anxious, because I'm worried about losing control. But that's often the case. People don't say that I don't take financial advice because I don't understand it, or it's overwhelming, or it's uncertain. But those emotional tethers, things like anxiety, lack of control, regret, or the fear of regret, is a big one. And the effort-related tethers, whether they be cognitive efforts, people's understanding, ambiguity around what advisors really do. Are they going to be asking silly questions? Are they going to get what they're hoping from an advice relationship? Or physical effort? Is it going to be timely? Will it be a real pain in the ass dealing with a financial advisor? So these are the sorts of things that tend to be conscious or often unconscious drivers or barriers from people actually taking advice, because otherwise I'm a real advice advocate. Everyone should do it. right? I think we're probably singing from the same hymn sheet here. So those economic effort related and emotional tethers are the ones that really fascinate me when we think about what stops people from taking advice.
That's a really powerful framework. So you got your 3 E's: the economics, the effort, and the emotion. Let's talk now. I mean, the logical follow-on is, what can we as an industry do to minimize these barriers to the extent possible? We'll start with perhaps the easiest one, the economic piece. Is it as simple as a greater diversity of payment options? Is it as simple as lowering our fee? Like, what can the industry do to reduce those economic barriers to entry for getting advice?
Yeah. Again, lots, I think. And some businesses do this really well. So when we think even the economic tethers, they're the perceptions that people have, right? And that's the key thing. Sure, firms can reduce their fees. Great. That's likely not going to help them in the long run, probably won't help clients in the long run. And actually what research shows is there's a relationship between the more people pay for advice, the more likely they are to implement that advice and take action, do something about it. So actually, low fees, when it comes to low fees at the sacrifice of quality, aren't a good thing, particularly if it stops people from doing something. So reducing fees is potentially, an obvious one, but probably not the direction most businesses want to go in or probably should go in. So actually, it's about the value perception, right? And it's about making that cost feel lower than it probably does for a lot of people. One of the examples that, and there are lots of ways that we won't be able to cover in this brief conversation, but I'll give you an example of a client I worked with. They focused on displaying that value by picking up on a very salient objective that each client had. So if you say to me, we could feel as a potential client, our service will cost you X $1,000 per year. And here's the value. You'll get tenfold that in terms of value of tax savings, of investment improvements, let alone the emotional benefits you get and all of that kind of stuff. Great, but that feels quite abstract to me, right? Tax savings, they're a very abstract thing. We use a lot of jargon in this profession. Investment performance, great, but it's abstract. Talk to me specifically about something that I'm concerned about that has a cost to it. And if we can tap into that, if we can create something very vivid, if you can talk to me about life insurance for my family, something that could be a huge, huge cost if I get wrong. I won't necessarily know about it, but my family certainly will. That is salient. And that might be a tenth of the value that you actually deliver to clients when you work with them, because you're not just talking about protection, life insurance and things like that. We're talking about a myriad of other areas that you can add economic benefit to a client. But with that comes stretching the message too far. And actually, by talking about too much that you can do for clients, you dilute the impact of that message. If you talk to me about the pounds, dollars, pence and cents value of a specific issue I have, that feels a lot more valuable than a dozen different things you could do that don't really strike a chord with me, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I love what you said earlier. Back in my psychotherapy days, I had this commitment to doing X amount of pro bono work. And, that it wasn't all bad. There were parts of it that were good and that I'm proud of. But I really did find that there was, that which we obtain too easily, we esteem too lightly. There was a real sense in which the people who are paying $250 an hour are more serious about their therapy homework than the people who are getting it for free. The people who are paying $250 an hour and I'm going to ding them if they don't show up are going to show up, versus the people who, there's no skin in the game if they don't show up. So it's less about lowering our fees and more about heightening the salience of the value that we provide, getting specific with financial pain points in our clients' lives and showing them how we're saving them value. I really like that. What about on the effort front? What about the effort front or the emotional front? What can we do to reduce the barriers then to cut the tethers, if you will, there?
Yeah, I guess the starting point for me is always that there's so much you could do, right? So when we think about effort, cognitive effort is the big one. By cognitive effort, what I mean is our brains want to reduce the amount of load on them, the burden that's placed on them, right? They don't want to burn calories by doing stuff. So we don't like things that are difficult to understand. We don't like things that are uncertain. We have to think about possible scenarios. We like things to be clear. So the more we can reduce that cognitive load people have, the more we can reduce the efforts they have to expend, the better. Now that effort comes in jargon we just mentioned. Remove jargon. There's a big drive in the profession to do that in any case, but that's a huge barrier. Beyond that, things like uncertainty are a big one. So I think the more familiar we are with what advice is and isn't, the more we kind of take for granted that other people are in the same position. So we know the difference between an Instagram influencer and a regulated financial planner or financial advisor. Often clients don't. We know what the process could involve for a client. Someone who runs a business will know what a client signs up for, how often they're going to see that client, what the process feels like as well. But clients often don't. So being able to map out what the experience looks like for people is really important. If you're sitting in front of a prospective client, we want to make sure they know that someone can answer all their problems, the symptoms that they're experiencing, the things that matter to them. But also we want to be clear how they'll do it. I don't mean the nuts and bolts, under the engine, which is what people tend to focus on. What's our investment philosophy and how do we do certain things? Fine, that might be of interest to some clients, but most clients will certainly want to know, okay, what happens? How does this work? Can I call you whenever I want? What happens if I've got a problem? Who will be in the meeting? Is it just one? What if you're off sick? What time of day do you? The really simple, basic, boring stuff people want clarity on. So reducing any question marks that might be in people's heads is a starting point. On the effort side, then on the emotional side, again, it's difficult to know what people's specific emotional barriers are. We know that as a whole, people have them. We know that as a whole, people are often anxious around engaging with a financial advisor. Two-thirds of people, a really interesting study, reported moderate to severe financial advisor anxiety. The anxiety at the prospect of meeting with a financial professional. Well, that's huge. Two-thirds of people moderate to severe. And you might think, okay, I can picture what that person looks like. A very anxious person, probably not my sort of target clients anyway. But actually, I've sat in front of advised clients. I remember specifically I think she was a tax partner, very successful in her professional career, very successful in her personal financial situation as well, and said to me, I've got a terrible confession about not understanding bits around her personal finances. So she was great in the corporate world, knew exactly what she was doing, very challenging to her clients and so forth. When it came to her money, she was very anxious and didn't want to tell her advisor this either. So financial anxiety is one of those emotional tethers that we can't always pinpoint directly. So we kind of need to start from a point of assume that there are things going on with our clients that we can't see until we validate that they're not there. And there are of course signs. So control is another one. We understand from speaking to people whether there's a bit of an issue with control. Are they currently a self-directed investor? If so, why? Is it because actually they don't want to, again, remember someone saying to me, relinquish the sense of control they had, hand over the baton to their advisor. Well, that's pretty powerful stuff, right? Hand over the baton. So I've been in control. I've been doing it myself for a number of years, and now I have to let go. It is powerful. So I'd say that the single best thing people can do is listen to what clients are saying. Maybe not directly. Again, few people are going to say, I'm anxious, I am worried about losing control. Some might, but more often not, people use metaphors, imagery, passing over that baton, relinquishing control in the conversations they're having with advisors. And if we ask the right questions, the onion questions, like when we're peeling back the layers, understand what stopped people in the past from making that decision, what's encouraged them to take action today that wasn't there 6 months ago. Once we start asking those sorts of questions, we start to see these kind of breadcrumbs of what's really holding people back. And then we're much better informed to be able to address them. And just having that framework in the head, thinking about, okay, someone's sitting here, they haven't proceeded yet. What are the potential reasons that they're not going to proceed? Are they economic, emotional, or effort related? And looking for those breadcrumbs, just being armed with that in our minds really helps, because we kind of know a little bit more what to look for in those situations.
At times on the show, I feel like I have to pause and like sort of remind the listeners of the value they've just gotten. I mean, I think this 3E framework, if you're a financial advisor listening to this, I think you sit down and at your next staff meeting, you say, okay, like how can we better highlight the economic value that we bring to the table? How can we reduce barriers around effort and make things how can we reduce uncertainty in the process? And then how can we address those unspoken emotional needs? Huge. I mean, huge value. Thank you. So,
Thank you.
Moving on to the next question, you help businesses change their clients' or prospects' behavior. And that's fundamentally the business that you and I are in. What mistakes do advisors make when it comes to changing behavior, and what could we be doing better as an industry?
Yeah, great question. And this is the fun bit for me, right? With all this, is that when we think about behavior change, it can mean so much. So what do we mean by behavior? Well, a behavior could be a client implementing a bit of advice. It could be someone signing a client engagement or agreement. It could be them downloading a newsletter, downloading an app, logging into a portal, whatever that might be. But there lies one of the common issues that I see, which is defining what a behavior is in the first place. And what tends to happen is when I'm engaged for consultancy work, someone will say something quite important but vague. So they'll say we need to increase engagement, or we want to grow, or we want to improve satisfaction. And you think, okay, that's great. Obviously, very important commercially, but that's not a behavior in itself. So what's the behavior you want to change? When you say engagement, what does that look like? Is it people downloading an app from this page? Is it an increase of clients who've received a proposal, had a discovery meeting, but haven't converted? What's the very specific behavior you want to change? Because once we narrow that down, we start to think about how we can directly influence that behavior. So the first thing businesses can do really is start breaking down what I call the big behaviors into small behaviors. Because the small behaviors are the things that we can actually change. They're the things that we say, right, we'll know when we've achieved this behavior. We'll know what success looks like. We know who's involved. We could give you another example. I had a business that was doing a sort of an internal project. Really, they had multiple teams, and the behavior they wanted to do was to increase referrals between different departments. So they had people that were responsible for, wills and estate planning, had an investment team, and they're actually dealing with different kind of client banks. Really, they said this is crazy. We should be at least referring more work, if not working on it in a more sort of collaborative way. The question they asked was initially, actually, can we do some sales training because we need to help people, cross refer. I said, why do we need to do sales training? What we've done there is assumed that that's the solution to our problem. So once we think, okay, the behavior is we want people to pass names of the right clients onto those that will help them. Great, we've been very specific. Once we've done that, we can say, well, why isn't that happening at the moment? Again, what are the barriers to that? And one of the barriers was a really complicated process. So there was an online system they had to go through to share details. Secondly, there was no real incentivization, either from a monetary point of view or just in terms of recognition for referrals. So that wasn't helping. Don't know if it was hindering, say, but it certainly wasn't helping. And the big one was that there was a perception that people would lose the client relationship. So if I get someone involved from team B over there, So I've had this current relationship for 10 years. I'm emotionally scared that I'm going to lose this relationship. So it wasn't really about skills per se. It wasn't sales training in a traditional sense that was required. It's behavior change. And the behavior was referring more clients, benefiting more clients by being able to provide a more comprehensive service. The tools needed were numerous. they need to see lots of different things to achieve that. But we can only get there where we start to think about what we can do to change when we're very specific about what that behavior is in the first place.
To arrive at that degree of specificity, because I was listening, I'm a big true crime, this is embarrassing admission, but I'm like a fanatical true crime podcast listener. And I was listening to an episode today on community policing. And they're like, okay, we're trying to reduce the murder rate. And really, when they drill down, I mean, of course, that they want to do that, right? But they drill down and they go, well, actually, what we need to do is strengthen families and, think about affordable housing and, have community programs and engage churches. And there's these myriad other considerations. Because if you think about, we need less murder, it's like more cameras, more cops. I mean, it's just a very different solution set than what eventually ended up being the case, which was a more grassroots, a more fundamental intervention set. If people, where do we fall down on not getting granular enough? I mean, is that typically where this sort of defining the problem falls down?
Yes. Often the case, because with granularity comes, dare I say it, kind of more accountability.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about behavior is we want to, a well-defined behavior is something that we can measure and know when we've done it or not. And it's the kind of thing you could explain to a 5-year-old. I can't explain engagement to my 2.5-year-old. I could try. But I can explain things that are very tangible, very real, very measurable, things that you can see and things that you know when someone's done because you can see them doing it or you see the result. And with that granularity and that tangibility of the behavior, does come some accountability because we know if we're not doing it, we know if we're getting it wrong. We can sometimes hide behind the more kind of jargony, esoteric terms.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably the starting point in a lot of cases, really define the behavior. And the second point, I've sort of alluded to this already perhaps, but we go into solution mode very easily.
Mm.
And, I was probably doing some of this at the start of our conversation where we say, what can we change? What can we do differently for people? And I list off a dozen things we could do, economic, emotional, effort-related things that we could do differently. Simplify and make clear what your process is. Well, that's a solution, right? I don't know for a particular firm what behavior they really need to change. Is it that people don't understand the service? I don't know. So the first port of call really for any business that's listening to this that actually wants to change is specifying the behavior. I have something called the SHAPE method that I just use to help structure projects. So you start with a strategy. What's the behavior? How do you define it? Who's involved in that thing? There might be multiple people you want to influence. Back to my referral example, there'll be people from individual departments that you need to influence. If we're sitting in front of a husband and wife, one might be really the decision maker, the person that's going to sign the document. The other one might be the influencer. So we need to think about both parties, what's going to appeal to them. We need to do that kind of analysis, the 3 E's for both of them, really. So thinking about what the behavior is, who's involved, how we'll measure success. And then the H bit of the SHAPE method is highlight the things that are going on. So we can ask people, but that doesn't tend to be that accurate in a lot of instances. We can look for indicators where we can ask people indirectly. And there are various sort of behavioral interviewing or survey techniques that we can use, or we can look for actual data on what people are doing. Particularly anything that's online, we can normally find data that tells us where people are falling down. And then the A, apply. So apply a change. When we apply a change, we have to be conscious about it, right? We want to make this change, be it how you run a discovery meeting. We're going to take this new structure. We're going to introduce an agenda for the first time. We're going to do something small that we want to get into the next bit. P, prove whether it works or not. And that's another bit. But when we don't have accountability, when we're not clear on the behavior, we can do a lot of stuff and not really know if it works or not. But a structured approach to making a genuine impact, really changing behavior, means that we have to be very conscious about what we're doing and prove it works. So once we've gone through, we've got a strategy, we've highlighted what's going on, what's stopping people from becoming a client, for instance, or implementing advice, apply a change, prove that it works or not. And then if it doesn't work, we go back to, okay, what's happening now? Let's kind of try again. If it does work, embed it. And that's where some of the larger projects I see fall flat, where they don't embed change. You think, right, we've tried this, it's worked, great, but there's no internal training that's done off the back of it. And they haven't educated people on why a process has changed. There's no kind of new procedures around it that are codified in the firm, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So following that kind of 5-step process works for me and my clients, but anyone can take the principles I'm talking about here and apply it to their own business, as long as they go through a very structured, scientific way of doing things. You'll always get to the right solution, because you'll know if what you're doing isn't right, and you'll know to tweak it and try again.
Yeah, I like that. So just quick review: strategize, like come up with a strategy, highlight, apply, prove, and embed. Another framework. Beautiful. I love it. I do love a good framework. I got a couple in my last podcast and a couple more great ones here. One of the things that advisors love to talk about the most is getting new business. I find that this is probably the number one concern of most advisors most of the time. And you've done some interesting work around the number one driver of new business for most advisors, which is referrals, right? This is the primary means by which advisors grow their books. In one of your pieces, you talk about how we're asking for referrals incorrectly, and you bring into concepts specificity and clarity to talk about the right and the wrong way to do this. Could you break that down for us?
Yeah, of course. So referrals in my business, any advice business, I say, as we know, hugely important, and we often leave it down to clients to figure out. Right, and we think the way that we can encourage more referrals feels a bit salesy sometimes, right? Do we tweet requests and sort of please, or do we kind of try and do it through reciprocity? Where what if what if we go out for an extra nice lunch, and that might just give them something that encourages them a little bit more. And we often sort of skirt around the edges there. But good clients, we also know, want to help us, great, but they want to help other people. So, and that's the first point that is really important for people to bear in mind, I think. Many advisors that I work with don't like the idea of sales. I don't particularly like the idea of sales, but I like the idea of helping more people. Mm-hmm. And there's a huge pressure. If I'm going to refer a provider of sorts to me, to one of my friends, I'm on the line there, right? I'm on the hook if that goes wrong. So the first thing we need to acknowledge is actually the benefit is about helping the people they provide. Very few advisors, in my experience, focus there. They don't say, we're doing something great for people in this position, and it'll be really helpful. They might say, do you know anyone who could do about help? Come back to clarity there and specificity. If I'm to think of anyone who needs help, I don't know where to start. So rather than that opening up so many opportunities for me, actually it just narrows my field of vision. I think I don't really know. It's all a bit of a blur. If you said to me, we've got this great seminar on for entrepreneurs, actually there are a few really key mistakes they make, and particularly if you're talking to entrepreneurs like you, some of the things that we worked on the first 12 months of our relationship, we find that's pretty common. Those mistakes you were making, that's pretty common with lots of people like you. Are there any entrepreneurs that that you've worked with, perhaps even of a certain size, that you think it would be really helpful for them to watch this recording of our seminar or come along to this event or meet and just run through absolutely, no pressure, but just run through a few of those mistakes and give them some tips. What we're doing there is two things. We're asking a very specific question to and the entrepreneurs that maybe employ 50 people or more, because they're the most relevant for this issue. So we're being very clear on the need there, on what the ask is. And also, we're not saying, pretty please, could you help me out? We're saying the person that you're going to refer to has some challenges and you want to help them. You want to help them because that's the social contract. You have your friends and their colleagues and they're probably a good person. And that's how we're focusing that conversation. We're not saying, please, could you do me a favor? We're saying, can I help you do a favor to your associate, the person in your network, and being very specific about it. And this is kind of called a Rolodex moment. Right? Going, no one really has Rolodexes anymore, but if you can help encourage someone to think, I've got that specific person in my mind, that's where we need to get to. Just asking if you know anyone and they've got a big Rolodex, they're just going to be flicking through it and not seeing any of the cards. You need to ask with clarity and specificity in a way that something stands out to someone. And that constraint that you give them actually helps them be able to pinpoint who you might be able to help.
It's such good advice. I sometimes try and help people who are looking for a new job. It's one of my favorite things to do is help people who are looking for a new job try and find meaningful work. And so often it's like, I'm just desperate. I'll take anything. And that's the worst thing you could possibly say, right? I mean, you're telegraphing to the world that you're low value and there's no specificity to it. So you're like, do I know of any jobs that are available? Yeah, I know of any jobs that are available. But you sort of paradoxically have to get very specific. You have to get very niche if you want to be considered. And the second reframe you talked about, so often I'll see advisors put something even in their email footer that says something like, XYZ Capital is always looking to grow. If you have any friends, please let us know. You're positioning that referral ask in terms of effectively making you more money and making you more successful. Your clients who are already paying you good money have very little interest in you being any richer. Now, if you can highlight the value that you've provided to their lives and say, hey, do you have do we agree that this has been a helpful relationship? Do you have any other friends who we could help? That's a very different ask. Everybody wants to help their friends. Nobody gets out of bed in the morning looking to pad the pocket of their advisor. And so putting it, that framing is subtle, but critical. It's easy to see how that would lead you to such different places. I love that. So we've brought the clients in now, right? So through this referral process, right, growing our businesses. You've also done some excellent work about how to provide them with excellent service and peace of mind. In particular, you talk about two different types of anxiety that clients may experience. You call it anxiety 1 and anxiety 2. What's the difference between these two types of anxiety and what does it mean for advisors?
Yeah, so I mentioned already, anxiety is prevalent in financial advice, probably more so than we consciously see. And I've stolen these terms, anxiety 1, anxiety 2, from a chap called Edgar Schein. And what he came up with was this idea that people are anxious about continuing to do stuff. So if the example I tend to give is paddling along a river, a waterfall's coming up. You're anxious about carrying on down that waterfall, right? For most people, that waterfall looks like running out of money in retirement. It looks like paying high charges on their investments. There are various things that are on people's mind. And that anxiety is sometimes healthy in a way if it encourages people to take action, right? If you can paddle away from that waterfall, great. If you can live a more prosperous retirement, great. Reduce charges, great. So anxiety kind of gets a bit of a bad rep, really. But this level of anxiety 2, is actually quite healthy, and it spurs people into action. And it's really what we need customers to feel a sense of. Otherwise, they feel very comfortable, or they are very comfortable. There's probably less value that an advisor can add. Where anxiety becomes a problem is the other form of anxiety 1. And this is something I've touched on before. Anxiety 1 is about doing something new. So it's when you're on that waterfall, you feel anxious about paddling along and, what's coming up, I wonder. Anxiety 1 is, what if I go down this path and it's worse? What if I do something I'm going to now have regret from the action that I take? And I mentioned earlier this concept of financial advisor anxiety. Well, if you think about someone who is self-directed or non-directed, if they're just muddling along with their personal finances, and actually there's a huge amount more they could and should be doing, then they might feel anxious about that. They might have this anxiety 2 that they know it's not ideal. But if that anxiety 2 is outweighed by anxiety 1, the anxiety they feel about potentially doing something and making a mistake, they still won't do anything. Now, what advisors can do about that is make sure that they reduce the anxiety around the idea of taking action. The way they can do that is, of course, in just communication techniques and making people feel at ease. But really, it's all about making them feel comfortable that they're not going to end up regretting their decision. Is a big one. We can do that through social norms, other people in their situation who've been very happy, who've done very well. We can do that by minimizing the economic risk we spoke about earlier. How that might be through guarantees or, as simple as money back guarantees, for example. Doesn't work for everyone, but some advisors do it very well. We can talk about what the role of a fiduciary actually means in terms of who holds their assets. Often people feel anxious that someone's going to run off their money by taking action, and an advisor thinks, we don't hold any money for our clients in any case. That's not our role. So there are various elements of this anxiety 1 that people feel, but we need to be aware of both of these forces that are taking place. We want to make sure that they do have anxiety 2 to an extent. They are aware of what the future will look like if they don't make a change. And if that future means them running out of money in retirement or having too much money by the time they die, perhaps, then actually that's right to be anxious about. So one, in our marketing communications, in our conversations, discovery meetings, how can we make sure that we don't want to give people false anxiety where it's not necessary, but we do want to paint a clear picture of what the future could look like if they don't take positive action. So making sure that that's there and clear. And secondly, reducing all the things that make people feel anxious about engaging with you as an advisor, you specifically.
Yeah.
And like I say, anxiety sounds like this horrible thing that we're sort of taught is bad and it is useless, but actually it's very helpful for getting people to take action. We just need to channel it in the right way.
Yeah, it's if you need a visual representation of this, check out the inverted U model of stress. Like if you model performance along one axis and stress along the other, it ends up looking like an upside down U because very little stress leads to low performance, right? And then, of course, overwhelming stress leads to low performance as well, nerves and anxiety and all that stuff. But there's an element of anxiety or stress or agitation that's necessary for us to get off the couch and, do the things that we need to do. And I think that sometimes that goes overlooked. So we're on a very linear path here. We've brought the clients in with the referrals. Mr. Courtenay can help with every facet of the work, right? We brought the clients in with the referrals. We're helping service them with the right mix of anxiety 1 and anxiety 2. Now we're going to keep them around. You have courses on how advisors can prove their value. And I think this is, I feel like I spend so much of my time on this because so much of what an advisor does is behavioral. Sometimes the behavioral stuff's hard to quantify or codify. How can advisors demonstrate their value in this new world we find ourselves in?
We're doing a good job so far, aren't we? By the sounds of it. So the value question is widely discussed now, right? There are lots of reports out there that show, okay, we've moved on a number of years ago from the idea of advisors' value being quantified in terms of investment performance or products or tax savings, for example. There are behavioral elements to value, there are emotional elements to value as well. The problem is it feels like there is a need, or people feel like there is a need to then prove that in an active way to their clients and prospects, right? And one way to do it is say that there's this report that shows actually X number of basis points is related to the behavioral stuff we do for you, making sure that you don't make big mistakes. And X% is related to the emotional bit. But that, again, that's kind of driven from the advisor, right? That's a sales technique. Us proving and persuading, that's a sales technique, and that feels uncomfortable, rightly so, to lots of people. What we need to do really is understand what value means to each person. So we know, as a whole, advisors provide value in lots of different areas. But what does that mean to that person that's sitting in front of you, or that couple that's sitting in front of you? What does valuable look and feel like to them? And something that is so easy, and it's easy for me to sit here and say this, but lots of people miss out on, and I have this conversation time and time again, is how people actually quantify or evidence that value. Now, if someone's sitting there in meeting one and you have a great conversation with them, that you ask them kind of these onion questions, you peel back the layers on what's really motivating them, and you found out that, it's buying property for their daughter when she's 30. That's the thing that's just on my mind that I'm worried about. Making sure my family will be okay if I'm not here. That's the thing that's really salient right now. It feels urgent. I'm really motivated to address that. Well, we know what value looks like to them. Value looks like solving that problem initially. And value might look like, in 6 months' time, solving another problem they didn't even know they had because they weren't feeling the symptoms of it. But as great advisors, people have teased those things out, and we say, look, actually, there was this other mistake you're making that we've helped with. And that was a problem you didn't know you had. That then becomes value as well. And in my experience, few advice businesses or advisors are tracking those nuggets of value. Mm. And by tracking, I mean writing that down, putting it on paper, and referring back to it. What tends to happen is we get to, perhaps this is a kind of an annual review or some point when maybe fees are being discussed, and we sort of retrofit that conversation. We say, like, here are the things we've done over the last year. But what tends to happen in our minds is that the goalposts shift, right? And I don't remember that I was in a place of worrying about buying property for my daughter or what the position my family would be in, because I've sorted that now. Yeah, you figured that out for me, so I'm not worried about it anymore. So it doesn't feel very important. But we need to track these things as we go. My wife works in spinal cord stimulation, people with chronic back pain, and they take a similar approach. When they're working with a patient, they have to jot down on day one, how far can you walk? What would great look like to you? Where do you want to be in 6 months' time, in 12 months' time? And often they'll start by saying that I just want to be able to get out of bed without too much pain. My pain's at a 9 now. I want it to be a 6 getting out of bed. And in 6 months' time, what happens? They're actually walking down the block. They're going to the shop. They're coming back. Their pain's at a 2. And they say, how are you getting on? And they say, not well. Not well at all. I went to the shops earlier and I was 25 minutes into my walk. I felt a niggling pain up the back of my leg. And they say, oh, do you remember where you were? Remember where we are now? But the beauty of what they do is they track it, and they refer to that not as a way to sell back to that patient, and advisors shouldn't use this as a way to sell to clients. They should use it to make sure we're on top of the things that are important to clients. Mm. And if it's an actual go-to live document, area of the portal, conversation, agenda item, whatever format that takes, but us understanding what's important to them and whether those things have been improved over time and whether they agree, and how do you think you're doing now? How's that going now? Because firstly, we want to know if they're not getting value, right? We want to know if actually they're really, really worried still about what the future might hold. Well, then that's pretty important for an advisor to know that. But more often than not, we want to be able to reinforce that they have got value from what they're doing. So for me, this idea of value in a behavioral sense, so kind of emotional sense, and an economic sense, the reports are really powerful because it shows on the whole all the different things advisors can do. The role now is not to convince people that what the report says is right for them. The role is, okay, knowing this, how do we have conversations with people to identify what's valuable to them, record it, and track it, measure it as we go, and get updated on it? Because that changes the whole situation from one of selling the value to people, perhaps in an annual review meeting, to an ongoing conversation about what's valuable and what could be done differently.
Yeah. So that, I think we take this one size fits all approach to proving our value. And what I'm hearing from you is, we're so intimately involved with every part of a client's lives. We're going to see them through many ebbs and flows of different worries. And at different times, that prism of value is going to look different. And we need to be cognizant of where they're at and highlighting the value that's most germane to them at any minute, not this sort of one size fits all. I think that's enormously thoughtful. So Philip, you speaking of value, you add value all through the chain of an advisor's day, and we appreciate you coming to share all these insights today. If people want to learn more about you and they want to learn more about their your work, where is the best place that people can follow you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, great. Thanks. The website is a good place to start, humansandmoney.com. It does what it says in the tin, it's about humans and money. And LinkedIn, I'm going to be more active on there. That's probably a great place. Just reach out, connect with me, say hi. Always helpful to get feedback as well. So Philip Courtenay on LinkedIn.
Okay, beautiful. Philip, thank you again for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thanks, Daniel. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.